Hello there, this is Senris. This video will be a tier list of 2024 Democratic candidates for president based on how effective they would be in a primary and the likelihood of them becoming the nominee, so I'm not rating them based on how much I like them. We are still well outside of campaigning season as this video is being made in the summer of 2022 before the midterms, which will influence whether or not many of these people run at all. So I could be way off with this, and I'll follow up with a video closer to the election to go over my predictions to see how accurate they were and update them based on current info. I've divided the various candidates into separate groups based on what sort of lane they would ostensibly occupy, as you generally have one person rise to the top and suck up the votes from other candidates for groups such as establishment picks, progressives, wildcards, etc. Let's start off with the group I've designated the obvious picks. This group is of course the incumbent Joe Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris. Incumbency is the most powerful advantage a prospective president can have, as there have only been 10 presidents to lose their re-election, although it's notable that 4 of them have been in the last 50 years. Whether this means the incumbent's advantage doesn't mean what it used to, because voters have more information or less trust in politicians is up for debate, but either way, Biden will not be handed his re-election on a silver platter. Let's talk about him first. Biden's 2020 primary victory was a strange one, as he went from one of the most unpopular candidates in the primary, coming in a distant 4th in the first 2 races, losing the 3rd to Bernie Sanders with less than half the votes of Bernie, and finally gaining his first win in South Carolina, which made him a serious contender for the first time in the race. Note, this wasn't just his first win in the 2020 primary, but his first win in any primary, as this was actually his 3rd attempt at a presidential run. After South Carolina, several of the candidates dropped out, most notably Pete Buttigieg, who was beating Joe Biden in the delegate count at the time. Buttigieg is clearly an ambitious man and wants to be president, but with his lack of experience and name recognition, his campaign was probably more about fishing for a campaign spot from its outset, and clearing the way for Biden to occupy the moderate lane in exchange for the transportation secretary position was probably as good an outcome as he could hope for. With this competition eliminated and Elizabeth Warren still in the race to split the progressive vote on Super Tuesday, Biden took the lead from Bernie Sanders and slowly edged him out over the rest of the primary, eventually winning the nomination handily thanks in no small part to the media convincing boomers that Biden was more electable than Bernie Sanders, and Bernie shooting himself in the foot repeatedly by saying how much of a friend he was to Joe Biden instead of going for the jugular. After the nomination was secured, Biden shifted to general election mode, presenting himself as the next FDR, hammering President Trump for his hands-off approach to the pandemic, which had gotten hundreds of thousands of Americans killed, and making all sorts of campaign promises, such as getting the virus under control, codifying Roe v. Wade, forgiving student debt, ending for-profit prisons, decriminalizing marijuana, and making 2 years of community college tuition-free. He managed to win the presidency, but so far has not fulfilled any of those promises besides forgiving about 1% of the total student loan debt. Over his year and a half as president, Brandon has become one of the most unpopular presidents in history due to a combination of factors including letting Roe v. Wade, one of the most important issues to Democratic voters, get overturned, leaving the young people that got him elected out to dry and still deep in student loan debt, and gas prices and inflation that haven't been this high in 40 years. I think the reason for his unfulfilled promises could be due to one of 2 things, the cynical reason or the tactical reason. The cynical reason is that he is opposed to all those things and never intended to do any of them. Biden was always one of the most conservative members of the Democratic Party in the Senate, from being best buds with segregationists and opposing forced busing, to trying to cut back Social Security and Medicare 4 times, to voting to overturn Roe v. Wade. While it's incredibly cynical and seemingly a bad idea to lie about all your campaign promises if you have any intention of winning a re-election or being remembered as a good president, Brandon was the senator from Delaware, which is 10,000 corporations in a trench coat looking for a tax break more than a state, and given his lifetime of being a servant to corporate power, maybe he cares more about that than his own presidency or its legacy. The tactical reason, on the other hand, is that he does intend to fulfill some of his promises and is just waiting for the optimal time to do so. Once his honeymoon period wore off, about 6 months into his presidency, it became more or less accepted as gospel that the Democrats were going to get shellacked in the midterms, barring some incredible unforeseen events occurring. Democrats seem to even accept this themselves and have done little to try to fight back against an incoming red wave, in some cases even backing Republican candidates financially in the hope that their radically regressive social views could give moderate Democratic candidates a leg up. To everyone's surprise, incredible unforeseen events did occur in May of 2022 when a memo was leaked that indicated the Supreme Court was likely to overturn Roe v. Wade in the coming weeks. Despite plenty of time to whip the votes to pass a law enshrining abortion rights, the Democrats instead treated this as the best possible outcome and started immediately fundraising off it and viewing themselves as back in the running in the 2022 midterms. Once the court struck down the decision, the Republicans immediately started working on their next steps in their regressive culture war crusade, focusing on attacking gay marriage, trans people, and the separation of church and state. This overreach by Republicans does give the Democrats a shot in the midterms, as even normie Republicans are turned off by the over-the-top restriction of abortion in all cases, including when the life of the mother is in danger or if she is a victim of rape or incest. The referendum vote in Kansas on August 2nd showed this, as 60% of the state voted against a ballot measure which would have allowed lawmakers to ban abortion, and which is even more striking when you consider Kansas is a deep red state where Trump won with a 15-point lead over Biden in 2020. So back to the tactical option, Biden may have been planning on fulfilling a campaign promise, say descheduling marijuana or forgiving $50,000 of student loan debt shortly before the midterms to give his party an edge in those races and something for those candidates to run on, as Biden's term so far has been characterized by not doing anything as crises are just piling up on each other. The overturning of Roe v. Wade threw a wrench in the plans of all sorts of political machinations, so maybe Biden had planned to forgive some student loan debt but now feels like he doesn't have to and they can still hold both houses of Congress, or maybe he will go full Dark Brandon mode and fulfill multiple promises at the 11th hour to buttress their chances. That would be a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Regardless of what happens in the midterms, I think Biden's re-election chances are grim. Recent polling indicates that 75% of Democratic voters don't want him to be the nominee in 2024, which is damning for a president that isn't even halfway through their first term and means he will almost surely have challengers in a 2024 primary rather than being coronated by the party. He's down but not quite out, and with student loan payments currently paused but due to resume in less than a month, he will at least defer them right before the midterms and possibly forgive enough debt to put the Democrats over the line to hold one or both houses of Congress, giving him the chance to turn his beleaguered presidency around. If the Democrats lose both houses, Biden is doomed and will likely get nothing done for the rest of his presidency, although that wouldn't be much of a change from what we've gotten so far. I think Brandon could lose the primary to a challenger in his own party relatively easy if they got some early momentum. Given that he beat Biden in the first two primaries in 2020, I could see someone like Pete Buttigieg defeating Biden and taking the nomination from him. Biden's chances depend a lot on what happens between now and 2024, with the January 6th committee season 2, the midterms, and possibly World War III occurring between now and then, but I think right now his re-election is slightly better than a crapshoot. I'm going to place him in B tier more for his incumbency advantage and Republican overreach on abortion than anything I think he will do to sell a second term. Kamala Harris, Biden's vice president, is the other obvious choice. The role of vice president is basically to balance out the ticket while running, make the president look good while they're in office, and try to win after the president has served 2 terms, as it's the best thing you can have on your resume when running for president. While many VPs have pretty low-key roles in the administration, Harris has the unfortunate position of being associated with a historically unpopular president and scant achievement in her role as second in command. Biden's sidelining of her may be due to her hostility towards him in the 2020 primary, as one of the most memorable moments of that primary was her calling out of Biden for his opposition to busing and how she was a part of the second class of black students which benefited from the policy.
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Despite this powerful moment and her claims of being a top-tier candidate, she performed poorly in the primary, not winning a single state or even a single delegate, and was likely picked as VP to avoid an all-male or all-white ticket more than because Biden was fond of her or she brought much to the table in terms of popularity. That, and the fact that she was a senator from California, the state with the most electoral votes, couldn't hurt. Despite her unpopularity as vice president, going from attorney general of a large state to senator to VP is about as strong of a resume as you can have for the job. She is also beloved by the Democratic establishment and attracted a lot of ex-Hillary Clinton staffers and donors in the 2020 primary. A lot of boomer Democrats love her and think she is much more popular than she is, and she has a veritable army of simps on Twitter and the K-Hive, so she has a strong online game compared to many competitors. While the Democratic establishment is souring on Biden and may throw him overboard before the election, Kamala can't really be blamed for much of his unpopularity due to not being a very active vice president. If Biden becomes too unpalatable and no other establishment candidate gains momentum quickly, I could see them backing Harris and throwing all the money she needs to win at her in the hopes of beating Trump or DeSantis. But given her past poor primary performance, I think she could get outplayed by a progressive or even another establishment type that plays the game better than her. She has less baggage than Biden, but is still saddled with being part of a historically unpopular administration and no association with a popular president like Biden has, so I think she would perform worse than Biden in a primary. C tier. Assuming that Biden doesn't run for re-election, you would have moderate/establishment candidates tripping over each other to replace him and challenge Harris, should she choose to run. I'm going to call this group the Establishment Goons, and it's made up of Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Hillary Clinton, Stacey Abrams, Joe Manchin, and a generic narcissistic billionaire such as Tom Steyer or Michael Bloomberg. First and most prominently, we have Pete Buttigieg. He did surprisingly well for a mayor of a town of 100,000 people in the 2020 primary, and he is competing with Kamala Harris for being Biden's heir. I'm really not a fan of this guy, but Democratic voters seem to like him a lot for some reason. In fact, he recently overtook Biden himself in a poll about the first choice for president among likely voters. He's young and gay at a time when the Democratic electorate is starting to tire of 70-year-old straight white guys that spend their whole lives in Washington, D.C., and has experience in both the military and the corporate world, making him a well-rounded candidate. I'm a big fan of undercover androids as a sci-fi trope, whether that's hosts, synths, Cylons, or what have you, and I entirely expect that we will have an android built in a lab running for president at some point in my lifetime, and Buttigieg's inhuman, robotic mannerisms make me wonder if that time is approaching. On the other hand, given the recent appearances by deepfake and half-assed body double versions of Biden and Trump, maybe they already walk among us. Buttigieg is the preferred candidate of the CIA, the Lizard People, and the Illuminati, and the Democratic base likes him as well, so I think he is a very strong candidate. We're too far out from the election to make reliable predictions, but if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on Buttigieg to win the nomination if Biden doesn't run. A tier. Amy Klobuchar is another 2020 contender that did surprisingly well in the primary. A senator from Minnesota, she checks a lot of boxes that boomer Democrats find attractive, including spending over a decade in the Senate and having no notable legislation passed, being a woman, and gaining the endorsement of Bill Maher. She has the tenacity to declare her campaign in the middle of a blizzard and to eat salad with a comb. She has a history of throwing binders and other office supplies at her staff when they fall short of her expectations, so she likely has higher DPS than most candidates. I don't think she'd do particularly well in a primary, but she could build on her odd popularity and perform better than in 2020, so she deserves a spot in C tier. Hillary Clinton has been floated by some of the stupidest political analysts in DC as the perfect candidate for 2024. Given that she has lost multiple presidential runs, is reviled by a huge swath of the US population, and has the complete inability to accept responsibility for her political shortcomings, she is a perfect candidate for the Democratic Party. She has blamed sexism, Bernie Sanders, Russia, conservative voters, the FBI, the Green Party, and the media for her 2016 loss, and since none of those things exist anymore, she will have a much stronger chance in 2024. Her unlikelihood of winning is matched only by her narcissism, and so she is certainly eager to face Donald Trump in a rematch. I definitely don't want her to be president, and she has no chance, but she is one of the people I most want to see run because it would be hilarious. F tier. Stacey Abrams is a popular voting rights activist from Georgia that helped flip Georgia to the Democrats in the 2020 election, making her an important part of Biden's victory. She ran for governor in 2018, losing a close race to Brian Kemp, who at the time was the Secretary of State, meaning he was in charge of running the election, an obvious conflict of interest. There were many irregularities and instances of voter suppression in the election, and Kemp was accused of stealing the election by many people, including Abrams. In the time since, she has only grown in popularity as a rising star in the Democratic Party and is challenging Kemp in the upcoming Georgia gubernatorial race, where they are virtually tied in the polls. If she manages to win, she could easily use the governorship to springboard into a presidential run, and she is ambitious enough to want to do so. She is well liked by the Democratic establishment for flipping a longtime red state, but she tries to straddle the widening line between moderate and progressive Democrats and doesn't manage to please either. She will have to pick a lane if she wants to run in 24, and her support for moderate reforms to education and criminal justice and excessive support of Israel turn off progressives, so her likely option is the establishment lane, which will likely be crowded. I think she'll be overcrowded by similar candidates. D tier. Joe Manchin is an interesting possibility in that he is reviled by progressives and leftists, but has crossover appeal with Republicans that no Democrat could match. He is very popular in his home state of West Virginia and actually has a higher approval rating among Republicans than his own party. While West Virginia is a small state with only 5 votes in the Electoral College, his popularity could pry it away from the Republicans. I don't think he has any intention of running and wouldn't do well if he did, and am mostly including him for his unique crossover appeal that could balance out a ticket as vice president. He's more likely to want to stay in the Senate, where he can continue to sink climate change and clean energy bills to continue adding to his fortune as a coal baron. D tier. Lastly, we have a generic narcissistic billionaire. Given their poor performance in 2020, I don't think it's likely that any of these guys will run. Bloomberg spent over $1 billion on his campaign and only lasted 4 months, so it seems like running as a rich asshole no one likes yields a poor return on investment. The one reason one of these guys might run is if a progressive candidate gets early momentum running on policies that threaten the wealth of these oligarchs or their companies, such as a wealth tax or guaranteeing free healthcare or housing as a right. F tier. The next group of candidates are the progressives, which is a lane one of them will surely fill in 2024, whether or not Biden decides to run. These possibilities include Bernie Sanders, AOC, Nina Turner, Marianne Williamson, John Fetterman, and J.B. Pritzker. Bernie Sanders is by far the most prominent of these candidates, performing poorly but radicalizing an entire generation in 2016 and commanding an early lead in 2020 but ultimately losing after the establishment candidates all dropped out and backed Biden. He is more popular than ever, and third time could be a charm for him as it was for Biden. While his age is certainly a liability at this point, he doesn't seem to be losing any of his faculties yet, which can't be said for candidates like Biden or Trump. The establishment could certainly use it against him, especially if Biden does not run and cites health reasons, as the talking point could be Biden is too old to run for an election and Bernie is even older than him. Many people who are to the left of the Democratic Party, like me, were disappointed in how he kept the kid gloves on when dealing with Biden in the 2020 primary, especially in their last debate, where he should have been much more aggressive, but the events of the past 2 administrations, especially with regards to climate change, might be enough for punished Bernie to emerge on a warpath. He turned socialism from a bad word that would doom any candidate associated with it to a mainstream position in American politics, so in some ways his ideas won even if he didn't, and he paved the way for a future social democrat type politicians to take up the mantle if he doesn't run. I think if he wanted it for real this time and decided he isn't going to make friends on the debate stage, he could edge out the other progressive contenders and possibly go all the way, especially considering he is one of the only progressives with any significant amount of crossover appeal. He would probably do at least as well as he did in 2020. B tier. AOC has been floated as a possible candidate, and when asked if she would consider running, has dodged the question, which is generally what you do if you are considering it. She would be the youngest president of all time, coming in at the minimum age or even allowed to hold the office at 35. As one of the most left-wing people in Congress, she's a big turnoff to establishment and conservative Democrats, meaning she would have an uphill battle. She is hated by Republicans as well, and would be in for a harsh general race. When she first came into Congress, there was a lot of enthusiasm about her among progressives and even leftists, but has lost some of that goodwill due to voting with the leadership on several key votes and backing Nancy Pelosi for her 1,000th term as Speaker of the House. She would probably be better served by spending some more time in the House or ascending to the Senate, which Senator Schumer clearly felt threatened by in the run-up to the midterms. I wouldn't be surprised and almost expect AOC will be president someday, but 2024 would be a long shot. Her best expectation in a primary would probably be shopping for a cabinet position which she could use in the future to shore up her experience in the executive branch, but at this point she is too much of a turnoff to moderates and I don't think she would do well in a primary. D tier. Nina Turner is another possibility in the progressive lane. She's a close ally to Bernie Sanders, serving as co-chair of his campaign in 2020 and as an aggressive surrogate for him in the media. She is similar to AOC in that she is very popular among progressives, but is even more disliked by moderates than AOC. This is probably because Turner doesn't play ball with the establishment much at all and is hostile towards many of their members. She ran for the House in Ohio earlier this year, but only garnered half the votes of her opponent, Shontel Brown, whom the establishment did everything they could to see that she defeated Turner. She would be in a much stronger position in 2024 if she had won that race, but the loss seems to have further radicalized and emboldened her, becoming pretty hostile towards the Democratic Party as a whole at this point. While people like me may appreciate that, I think the Democratic establishment would fight against her nomination particularly hard and that she would have slim chances of making it very far in a primary. D tier. Marianne Williamson is one of the more interesting possibilities as she went from being a minor candidate in 2020 that people regarded as a strange new age woman that no one had heard of to becoming quite popular among progressives by the time she dropped out and endorsed Bernie Sanders. She's a real outsider to the party, having not been involved much with them until her presidential run. Her spiritual side adds to her appeal, as she can convincingly talk about the very soul of this country being poisoned and sell it to cynical materialist types like me. The more time she gets on the debate stage, the more appealing she seems to become, and given how little time she got in the 2020 debates, a less crowded field could greatly benefit her chances. Even the other candidates on the stage in those debates seem to recognize her message and its potential power among the American people. Doesn't look like Andrew Yang's a fan though. It's also worth noting that she has a sense of political bravery that can't be discounted in these populist times. When asked about reducing healthcare costs in the 2020 debates, she didn't mince words about tepid reforms to Obamacare. She straight up called the entire industry corrupt, which is what normal Americans want to hear from politicians in this day and age.
Well, first of all, the government should never have made the deal with the big pharma that they couldn't negotiate. That was just part of the regular corruption by which multinational corporations have their way with us.
If Biden did decide to run, I could see Williamson run a powerful insurgency campaign and challenge him as being the wrong man for the times. She's difficult to rate and a bit of a wild card, but I think she has her finger on the pulse of mainstream America more than many Democratic politicians do and could be surprisingly competitive. C tier. John Fetterman is the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania and not well known by people outside the state until recently. He's running for Senate against TV personality Dr. Oz and is currently rewriting the book on how to conduct an online campaign against an opponent. He is ahead in the polls and building a strong online following due to his masterful trolling on Twitter and effective campaign ads hammering Dr. Oz for being a carpetbagger from New Jersey. Fetterman looks, acts, and talks like a normal guy, which could give him some star power on a stage filled with uptight suits. He's also 6'9" and would tower over the rest of the debate stage, and while looks shouldn't matter in a Democratic contest, it can't be denied that the American people like a tall president, and he would be the tallest of all time, and has half a foot over Donald Trump if he was on a stage with him in a general election. Of course, for him to have a good shot, he needs to win his Senate run first, and it remains to be seen if his online shenanigans will translate to the general electorate of Pennsylvania, as most normies aren't on Twitter 24/7 to see him trolling his opponent. If he runs and sticks to his progressive guns, I think he could run an effective campaign. C tier. J.B. Pritzker is a billionaire from Chicago and the current governor of Illinois. Another possible candidate that wasn't well known outside of his state until recently, he has managed to stay popular as governor and has a pretty progressive platform. He doesn't have much controversy surrounding him, and his ability to self-fund his campaign means he wouldn't need to be beholden to donors if he chose to go that route, which could give him the leeway to run a very progressive campaign. As a fellow small YouTuber, I do have to ding him for his probable use of buying views, as funny as that is. A good view-to-like ratio on YouTube is 10:1. That is, if your video gets 1,000 views, you should expect 100 likes, unless it's about something very controversial. Mr. Pritzker's most viewed video has over 130,000 views, which is great for a channel with less than 3,000 subs, but there is no way it would only have 64 likes if that many people watched it. Many of his videos get less views than mine, with a fraction of the subs as him, so I had to bring up the dishonor he brings to us little guys. Nevertheless, I think he could have a solid showing in a primary, although lack of name recognition would hold him back. D tier. Now you may be wondering about a notable progressive that's missing from this group, and that's because Elizabeth Warren is part of the next group, the Wannabes. Warren has fallen from grace from being a popular progressive associated with Bernie Sanders to betraying him in 2020 in a way that his diehard fans will never forget. For those that don't remember, she claimed that Bernie had told her a woman couldn't be president on the debate stage in 2020, despite the fact that in 2016, Bernie didn't even want to run and tried to get her to run and back her in his place. I think she honestly thought that if she sabotaged her friend Bernie, she would be handed the VP spot on a silver platter, but instead managed to lose critical support from one of her most important demographics. She tries to play both sides with moderates and progressives and manages to not be particularly popular among either. The only group she seems to appeal to is very highly educated white people, technocrats, and the nerdiest Twitter users on the platform, and conservatives dislike her even more than most progressives. She has poor political instincts and would get outplayed by other progressives if she attempted to run. F tier. Beto O'Rourke is a tryhard from Texas. He's known more for being a loser than an effective Democratic politician, losing the 2018 Senate race to Ted Cruz, the 2020 presidential race to just about everyone, and he's going to lose the 2022 race for governor to Greg Abbott. He has no chance in 2024, but likes losing so much that he might try anyways. F tier. Next is just a composite of popular-ish Democratic governors like Gavin Newsom, Jay Inslee, and I almost put J.B. Pritzker here, but his wealth and recent chatter about him makes me think he has more of a shot than these guys. I think Newsom comes off as trying way too hard to sound like a politician at all times and would alienate normal people on the debate stage, and Inslee's poor performance in 2020 means he wouldn't try to run again. One thing Newsom does have going for him is he's the governor of California, and locking down that state would give him a massive electoral haul, but I can see him losing his own state to more established candidates easily. He also gives me Android Manchurian candidate vibes like Buttigieg. He polls well, and that is the only reason he makes it into D tier. I also want to include a composite of lightweights that may run, like Bennett, Booker, Swalwell, Whitmer, etc. They'll be represented by arch-loser John Delaney. No one knows who these people are except politics-obsessed nerds like me, and none of them has a chance. F tier. Joe Kennedy III narrowly makes it out of that group, mainly due to his family name and his weird voice. Still, he couldn't even beat Ed Markey in a Senate election and got his ass handed to him in that race. He may be narcissistic enough to run, but he wouldn't get far. F tier. The last wannabe is Al Franken, someone who Boomer and Gen X liberals think is really funny for some reason and think he shouldn't have resigned for groping a woman while she was asleep because of their favorite slogan, "But Trump." Him running would be funny, but not in the way they think, and he would drop out before Super Tuesday. F tier. Now we come to the final group of candidates that I consider wildcards. First, we have Liz Cheney, a Republican whose work as part of the January 6th committee has endeared her to many liberals who will eagerly rehabilitate anyone. Despite her voting with Trump almost 100% of the time, I could see liberals ignoring that and uncritically buying into the many op-eds that have been and will be written about how we need a bipartisan ticket to bring the country together. At the end of the day, though, she doesn't come across as very charismatic, and her anti-abortion views wouldn't help her in a campaign where that is likely to be a top issue for Democrats, and if she did run for president, she would be more likely to do so as an independent than switching parties. D tier. Next, we have Donald Trump. I don't seriously think this would ever happen, and I added in more to point out that if by some act of God, DeSantis got enough early momentum to doom Trump in the Republican primary, and Trump ran as a Democrat and somehow made it through the primary to become the nominee, liberals would still vote shame progressives into voting blue no matter who because they are overly house-trained, have no standards, and are somehow even more cult-like than the Republicans when it comes to mindlessly supporting their candidates. In any case, Democrats would rather nominate their own conservatives like Biden or Buttigieg than a Republican one like Trump, so his campaign wouldn't go anywhere. F tier. Here's another composite candidate meant to represent a popular Democratic actor or celebrity such as Matthew McConaughey, Tom Hanks, The Rock, or Oprah, but I'll represent them with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, as I think he has a few things going for him that would make him the strongest of those options. He's a self-made man with an interesting life story, he's young by presidential standards, and he has decades of media exposure and knows how to work a camera and command a stage. In a presidential primary debate, that, combined with his physically imposing stature, could play very well to a TV audience, and he would have an easy time appearing more confident and charismatic than someone like Buttigieg or Harris. The 2024 election will likely be a referendum on culture war issues such as abortion, trans rights, and teachers, so if The Rock ran on a generic Democratic platform and threw in one or two progressive planks, like passing an executive order on abortion on day one of his presidency and a public health care option, I could see him dropping the people's elbow on both moderates and progressives in a primary. I'm not a big fan of the idea of celebrities as president, but I do think that tactically it could be one of the best options for Democrats, assuming they want to win. A tier. I originally had Andrew Yang in the wildcard section here because of the possibility that his nascent Forward Party might fizzle out and he would run as a Democrat again, but the other day they united with the Renew America movement and Serve America movement, two center-right groups, so it looks like they may be serious about forming a third party. The last thing this country needs is a third right-wing party, and the notable absence of Yang's signature legislation in the 2020 primary, universal basic income, means that he wouldn't have what little support he had, especially among broke young people. He belongs in F tier regardless of what party he may try to run with. Another wildcard that has been talking about presidential aspirations recently is Howard Stern. My first thought on this was that there's no way he would make it through a primary due to his very controversial past, and it would be easy to demonize him in campaign ads, but at second glance, he could be pretty effective on a debate stage. His shit-talking skills are unquestionably strong, and he would be able to outplay uncharismatic politicians with his decades of media training. They don't call him the king of all media for nothing. If he managed to make it through a primary and got onto a debate stage with Donald Trump, I think he could play Trump's game even better than he can and could garner unprecedented independent and non-voter support. Still, his problem would be making it through a primary, and he doesn't really have a lane that would work out well for him. His decades of outrageous shock jock behavior would turn off moderates, and his diehard support for conservative Democrats like Hillary Clinton would alienate progressives. He would be entertaining to watch, but I don't think he could cut it in a primary. D tier. Next, we have Michelle Obama, former First Lady and wife of Barack Obama. Despite not having much of a presidential resume besides being married to one and not showing any interest that she wants to run for president, she is the one candidate that I think would instantly be coronated and that no one would have a chance against. She's just too popular and regarded as one of the most admired women in the world, and having her husband Barack, liberals' favorite former president, around in the White House would only strengthen her chances. If she got in the race early, she would quickly clear the field and sail to victory in a primary, regardless of what policies she or anyone else runs on. I don't think she will run, but if she did, she would definitely be S tier. Another wild card would be former President Jimmy Carter. Fossilized Democrats are in vogue right now. He has experience in the White House that could serve him well, and he never got that second term. He's also one of the most popular Democrats alive. S tier. I'm just kidding, there's no way he would run, and he should spend his time enjoying retirement instead. The last candidate worth consideration is Jon Stewart. He's made it clear he has no intention to run, but if he did, he would be a powerful candidate with more name recognition than most politicians, the wit to outflank his opponents on a debate stage, and the ability to deliver a hell of a speech. He would probably need to attach himself to an established politician to shore up his complete lack of experience in holding office, but like Michelle Obama, he is beloved by most all liberals, and I could see them falling in love with him all over again in a primary. He would also have a significant amount of crossover appeal with independents and even conservatives, as his vocal support for veterans and comedy skills, which target the worst aspects of conservatism more than the people who vote for Republicans, could attract moderate Republican support, what few of those there are left anyway. I think it's very unlikely he would run, but if he did, he would be tough to beat. A tier. So that's the end of the tier list, but I want to spend the end of the video to go over a few presidential tickets that I think would be particularly effective. First, the bulletproof option, Michelle Obama and Pete Buttigieg. Liberals would come at the idea of the first black woman president and the first gay vice president on the same ticket, and given their popularity, this is probably the strongest possible combination of candidates. Their likely platform may not be that appealing to progressives, but their identity politics appeal would simply be too strong to overcome. If the Republicans continue their over-the-top culture war antics over the next 2 years, they are going to simply lose too many normies to have a chance at winning, if they haven't already, and a ticket this ironclad would assure victory. Next, we have the Burn It Down ticket, consisting of Punished Bernie and his most trusted lieutenant, Nina Turner. An unrepentantly progressive ticket that focuses on Biden's history of conservatism, opposition to abortion rights, and his inability to protect them or ensure the healthcare that Americans need to stay safe in the God knows how many pandemics will be going on in 2024 will be the key to defeating him in a primary should he choose to run. The same platform would be effective against any other moderate candidate that he names as his heir, for example a Harris-Buttigieg ticket. Biden's historical unpopularity should be countered with the opposite of what he is doing, and an actual next FDR type of social democrat campaign might be the right message at the right time after everything the American people have been through the past few years. As disappointing as his 2020 run was to socialists like me, there haven't been any exciting new torchbearers to pick up his message yet, and so Bernie, Nina, or whoever the leftmost candidate ends up being is who I'll end up voting for in the primary. Another powerful ticket that I'll call the nuclear option could be Buttigieg and Liz Cheney. I could easily see normie liberals lining up behind Buttigieg, but he has very little crossover appeal to Republicans, so running with someone like Cheney could peel enough never-Trumper conservatives to simply deny Republicans the numbers they need to win a general election. The idea of this ticket sounds horrific to me, and they'd likely govern just as conservatively as Biden, but the Democratic Party cares more about appealing to conservative white moms in the suburbs than crazy communists like me, so maybe the crossover appeal of this ticket would prove effective. The star power ticket of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Jon Stewart could be another good option, as their popularity and charisma would serve them well in a primary. Like I said in the Rock section, these two running on a generic Democratic platform with one or two big progressive asks could be one of the few ways to appeal to both moderates and progressives. On the debate stage, these two would be tough to beat by uptight, focus-grouped moderates, and I could see them doing well in both a primary or general election. One of the people Trump has floated as his new VP is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and a VP debate between her and Stewart would be an even bigger smackdown than the Biden and Paul Ryan debate, which would be hilarious. While these two are more of a long shot individually, the leave it to the big boys ticket of John Fetterman and J.B. Pritzker together could be a strong combo. With Fetterman's powerful online game and Pritzker's deep pockets, they could mount a strong campaign, and without the need for much donor money, they could run a progressive platform as well. Regardless of what happens to Fetterman's political career, whoever is running his social media operation is going places, and perhaps they could help Pritzker with his fledgling YouTube career as well. Lastly, we have the soul power ticket of Marianne Williamson and Reverend Raphael Warnock. Warnock wasn't included as a presidential candidate because he hasn't indicated any intention of running, and he has even less experience and name recognition than someone like AOC, but what he does have is the charisma and public speaking skills of a preacher. I'm not a religious person at all, but even I am coming around to the idea that a politics that addresses the spiritual decline of this country is what the people want to hear, and Williamson and Warnock are two of the best communicators of that sort of message. That, along with their popularity only increasing over the past 2 years, could make them a formidable ticket. So there you have my tier list of 2024 candidates and some of the possible tickets that might prove especially effective. As a socialist that doesn't have much faith in electoral politics to provide people with positive political change, I can't say there are many people on this list that I can see myself voting for in a general election. The Democrats have never nominated anyone I've found acceptable, so I've never voted for him in a general election, but perhaps Biden and Harris's historic unpopularity will finally convince Democrats that the third way, neoliberal mire they've been stuck in since the 90s isn't working anymore, and it's time for a change to a more populist, social democrat style of party. Otherwise, I may just have to write in Susan Sarandon. We'll see as 2024 gets closer, and I'll make at least one follow-up video to update my predictions closer to the election. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe so we can overtake JB Pritzker's YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more videos like this. Peace.